Welcome to Grace. I'm glad you're here this weekend. I hope everybody's had a good week. If you came in and you walked down and you've not been here before, or maybe if you've been here before, you've probably noticed that the stage looks a little different, unless you're really unobservant and you just don't know what's happening. What's happening here? Well, I was thinking as I was kind of preparing for this new series on Jonah, when you get like a year away from a sermon series. Does anybody know, like last year, by the way, what we were preaching last year? Like this time? Okay, yeah. I think it might have been the 7 deadly sins. I think it might have been me speaking. Thank you. Sometimes you get a year away, though, from a sermon series, and you think to yourself, and I think this, and I'm like, I give the sermon series, and you get a year away, and then you think, what did I talk about? What was that about? What did we do last summer? Our series for this summer is on the book of Jonah. And if there's one thing that I want you to get from the book of Jonah, if there's nothing else that you get, if you only get one word from the book of Jonah, I want that word to be redemption. Jonah and redemption. The book of Jonah is ultimately a story of redemption. Jonah gets redeemed. The sailors get redeemed. The Ninevites get redeemed. And ultimately, when we finish it all out, we come to find out that we get redeemed through the work of Christ on the cross. And I promise you, even though Jonah's in the Old Testament, even though he's a minor prophet, you will find Jesus in the book of Jonah. And we will see him from page to page. So before we kind of dig in, I just want to pause and just pray for the next couple weeks as we study Jonah and for this morning. So if you'll join me in prayer. Lord, you've brought us here, and right now we know there's a whole bunch of stuff on our minds and on our hearts. We've had busy weeks. We've had things that have not gone our way. We've had things maybe that have gone our way. But God, we're here right now, and we're seeking you. So Lord, I just ask that you'd help clear our minds, allow us to focus on you, that Lord, ultimately this time will be a time to engage your word and to come face to face with you, and that you would work through us. Lord, speak through me, speak to us. We ask this in Christ's name, amen. Now, when you think about the book of Jonah, the first thing that probably comes to your mind is a giant whale. Right? You're probably picturing that big whopper whale swallowing the little prophet of Jonah. If you get a chance, maybe if you get bored with me, or maybe after the sermon, you can Google Jonah, and you'll see all these pictures, these images of Jonah sitting in there pondering inside the belly of the whale. You'll see giant pictures of the whale swallowing Jonah, like we kind of have up there, right? Jonah's just about to get taken out. That's the image that you probably get when you think of Jonah. But the truth of the matter is, the book of Jonah is really not about a whale. That's the image we get. But most of Jonah, as a matter of fact, the great fish, there is no whale mentioned in Jonah. The great fish is mentioned in one single verse. The rest of the book of Jonah is about a guy named Jonah, a prophet, and the mission that God has for him. And so, when you look at Jonah, by the way, Jonah is a minor prophet, very short, 48 verses. Very little book. Only one of those verses talks about a whale. And if you're having difficulty finding it, Gene mentioned it when a couple weeks ago we did this in youth group, and you should have seen some of the teens trying to hunt down Jonah, because it is a really hard book to find, particularly because it's so little. So like you flip one page and then you think you've missed it, but it's like right there. If you have trouble finding it, you go past the major prophets, you start to work your way through, you hit Amos, you're getting close, you've hit Micah, you've gone too far, and then you're in Jonah. I want to recommend, it's 48 verses long. I know everybody has a very busy week. Read the book of Jonah sometime this week. It'll take you like 10, 15 minutes to read. You can read a couple verses a day, but read the book of Jonah because it will help you kind of give a full understanding of what is going on in Jonah, a lot better than from me speaking. So please read it over the week if you get a chance. The book of Jonah is about Jonah, but nobody knows who wrote it. Some people, there's a tradition that says that Jonah wrote the book. Probably not. Probably not Jonah. As a matter of fact, there's probably really good reasons that Jonah didn't write the book, just because of some of the things that are said about Jonah in the book. We don't know who wrote the book. We don't know when the book was written. We have a rough idea, between like a 400 and 500 year time frame. Obviously, it was written after the events of Jonah, but we don't know when it was written. And we don't know who the book was written to. So we don't know who wrote it. We don't know when it was written. We don't know who the book was written to. I mean, we know it was probably written to Jews, but we don't know who exactly that audience was. So at the end of the day, we don't actually know a whole lot of background to these 48 verses that we call Jonah. But what we do know about Jonah, and we know very little, but what we do know is incredibly important to understanding the book of Jonah. All right, and when Jonah was written, whoever the audience was, it's very obvious that the author of Jonah already was thinking in his mind that they knew who Jonah was. There's not a lot of information about Jonah, and the reason is because the people who originally read it were supposed to already know a little bit about Jonah, so we got to know a little bit about Jonah before we read it. There's only one verse in the Bible, outside of those 48 verses, that minor prophet, that mentions Jonah at all. And it's really important because if it wasn't for that single verse, we would know very little about Jonah. The only verse is in 2 Kings 14:25. If you want to look that up, you certainly can. The passage is talking about a king. The king's name is Jeroboam the second. He was a king of Israel, and we also know that he was a bad king. So as far as kings go, not so good. And the prophecy has to deal with him, and it also has to deal with Jonah. I'm going to read to you the verse, and this is what it says. The only verse about Jonah in the Bible, other than the book of Jonah. He restored the border of Israel from Lebahotham as far as the Sea of Arabah, according to the word of the Lord, the God of Israel, which he spoke by his servant Jonah, the son of Amittai, the prophet who was from Gath-hepher. That's it. That's the one verse right there. So from that passage, let me just kind of go over some of the things, and there's also some stuff in the book that we can kind of gather. But let's just kind of go over who Jonah is. All right, first thing that we know about Jonah, and this is probably the most obvious, is that Jonah was Jewish. Jonah was Jewish. He was a Hebrew. His people were the people of Israel. And all the places mentioned in the book, by the way, Nineveh, Joppa, Tarshish, none of them are in Israel. So all the places mentioned are not Jewish, but Jonah himself was Jewish. And the reason we know that is because, well, first of all, he's a prophet. He's serving one of the kings of Israel in that one verse. And then later on in the book, there's some sailors. They run into Jonah. They're like, hey, Jonah, who are you and like where are you from? And Jonah says, I'm a Hebrew. So he's Jewish. And when we think of Jewish, it's not like today when someone says like, well, what's your religion? Oh, I'm Jewish, or I'm Christian. You got to think in the Old Testament, when you're Jewish, it means so much more than just your religion. Right? Jews lived in Israel. That was your land. That was your home. Those were your people. It was your ethnicity. It was your race. It was your culture. It was your way of life. Jonah was a Jew. And when Jonah was Jewish, Israel was not one nation. It was two nations. There was a northern kingdom and a southern kingdom. All right? Southern kingdom was called Judah. The northern kingdom was called Israel. The northern kingdom was bad. The southern kingdom was not as bad, but still bad. All right? But Jonah was a part of the northern kingdom. And that'll kind of play in as we get a little further here. So that's who Jonah was, though. He was Jewish. Those were his people. That was his home. Jonah was a Jew. We also know that he was a prophet. And that means that God spoke to him. And apparently, Jonah was pretty good at being a prophet because in his day, if you said you were a prophet and you were not correct, they killed you. So we know that Jonah was pretty good. We only know of one prophecy that he actually does. And when you think of prophecy, it's not reading the future. It's declaring the truths of God. And sometimes that is something about the future, but 90% of the time it is just declaring the word of the Lord. And so the expectation is when the prophet speaks, God speaks. God speaks through the prophet. And this was unique and special. Even today, some people today will claim to have the gift of prophecy. And whether you think that that's true or not, people today who normally claim to have the gift of prophecy, they're not claiming to have what Jonah had. All right, there's normally, most charismatics will say, there's a difference between New Testament prophecy and Old Testament prophecy. And I just say that to point out that what Jonah has is something very special and something very unique. There's nothing today that compares to what Jonah had being a prophet. God spoke to him. I mean, he literally spoke to him, and he spoke through him to his people. And the other thing we kind of know about Jonah is that he was also a patriot. He loved the nation of Israel. Like, I don't know what day is Independence Day for Israel. I don't know how they celebrate it there today. I don't know how they celebrated it back then. But I imagine that Jonah, he's like the kind of guy that he throws the biggest party on the block. I mean, Jonah's got hot dogs, he's got hamburgers, he's inviting everybody over. Jonah's pet wiener dog is wearing like a Uncle Sam costume. He's shooting off fireworks. Everybody knows about Jonah. Jonah loves his nation. He's got like on the back of his pickup, he's got like an Israel flag or something. Jonah is a patriot. He loves his country. The only prophecy, and you might have read that and like you thought, what does this really mean? The only prophecy that Jonah gives to King Jeroboam II is a prophecy of military expansion against the Assyrian Empire. All right? These were lands that the Assyrian Empire had taken from Israel. Jonah prophesies, hey, we're going to go back, we're going to kick some butt, we're going to take some lands, we're going to get some victories. That's what we're going to do. Yeah, America. All right, that was Jonah's prophecy. Only thing he's known for is going, kicking butt, and taking lands. Jonah was a patriot. He loved the people of Israel. He loved being Jewish. That was his people. And when we look at why Jonah sins, when we come to see why does Jonah sin, ultimately it's connected to the fact that he loves his country. The interesting thing about Jonah is what we know about Jonah prior to the book of Jonah, and we don't know much, but what we do know, and what we know about prophets, is that they're supposed to be good people. Like Jonah and the prophets, right? They're supposed to be like the righteous people of God. They're the people that show up at church early. Jonah was the kind of guy that probably prayed a lot. He was righteous. He's probably the kind of guy that even the day after the Israel Youth Pancake Breakfast, he probably donated some money because that was just a big deal to him, all right? And Jonah, everything that he should be, right, is righteous. Everything about his past is righteous. I mean, we don't know his whole past, but we can assume, being a prophet, being a man of God, he's probably a pretty good dude. And it just kind of points to the fact, and there's a warning here for Christians, and I think we need to get this, right? There's a reality that just because you were righteous in the past doesn't mean that you're going to be righteous in the present. The righteousness of your past does not ensure the righteousness of your present. The fact that Jonah was a great prophet, the fact that he did a lot of good things for God, does not change the fact that in the book of Jonah, he commits a sin, he turns away from God, and he does something wrong. The moment that you think that you've done enough, and any of you ever thought that? And maybe we haven't. Maybe we're good people here, right? But sometimes we look back and we think, I've served God enough. I don't need to pray or spend any time with the Lord today. I did that last week. I used to help out at church with this or that, and I did that back in the old days, and so now I'm good. I did my time. I served my time. It's okay if I look at some of this stuff because, other days I look at the right stuff. It's okay that I say some bad things every once in a while to like my wife or somebody else. It's okay because on other days I say good things. The righteous things that you've done in the past do not make you righteous in the present. And we can't be so arrogant as to think that in the future, right, because we're righteous right now, because we're serving God right now, we can't start to think, it is a foolish thing to think that we will not fall in the future. The righteousness of our past is not sufficient enough for our present. The moment that you think that, the moment that you think you've done enough, the moment you think that you're good enough, Satan will get you. Peter, the follower of Jesus, the apostle, he warns about this in the New Testament. In 1 Peter 5:8, he says, "Be sober-minded, be watchful. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour." The moment that we think that we're good enough, the moment we think we're not going to have any issues, that's the moment that Satan will devour us. That's the moment that we will fall. A few months ago, I heard about this pastor, a guy that I knew, and it kind of took me back for a minute. Everything I knew about this guy, really good guy. He had a really good church, really righteous man. He's the kind of guy that I didn't know him like really well, but anytime I talked to him, he said something really insightful, really thoughtful. He was very good. And everything I heard about his ministry was awesome. He was changing people's lives. Their church was growing, and it was just really stunning to sit in this meeting and hear that this pastor had been stealing tens of thousands of dollars from his church. And I could just it was almost like jaw-dropping, because you think of like the people that you would put on a board, and I knew going into the meeting that there was going to be some issue, and I was thinking in my head, like, who could it be? And he was not on my list. I got to be real. I was thinking it might be somebody else. I was not thinking it was going to be that guy. It's stunning. But that's what happens when you start to think that you're righteous past, that you're good enough, that it's never going to happen to you the moment you let your guard down. And that guy, he got devoured. He got devoured. The righteousness of your past does not ensure the righteousness of your present. Jonah was a prophet of God, and he disobeyed God. God calls Jonah to go to the great city of Nineveh and to preach to them about their sin. Jonah is called to preach a message ultimately of redemption. He's called to preach a message of repentance. And the word in the book, you see it numerous times, arise. Arise, Jonah. Go to Nineveh. Arise. They say it when he's on the ship. Arise, Jonah. Get up. They say it later on in the book. Arise. All of that to say, the call is really simple. Jonah, get up, go to Nineveh, preach. That's it. It's not a whole list of things you got to do. It's not a very complex thing. God doesn't ask Jonah to bring a band with him and lead them in worship. God's not telling him to do a magic show or a puppet show to get the people interested. God just says, go to Nineveh, preach. Call them out on their sin. Call is really simple, but the problem is that Jonah doesn't want to go to Nineveh. And in order to understand why Jonah doesn't want to go to Nineveh, you've got to understand a little bit about the people of Nineveh. All right, Nineveh was this humongous city, huge city. It was probably picture like a New York City of the ancient world. It was one of the biggest cities in the world. And it was a city in the Assyrian Empire. Now you might remember Assyrian Empire, right? Jump back to what was Jonah known for before? He gave one prophecy against the Assyrian Empire, against the Assyrians. So Nineveh is a city in the Assyrian Empire. It's huge. And Assyria is the arch enemy of Israel. And like maybe a comparison that would be good for us would be kind of like Russia in the United States, but that wouldn't be like a legit comparison. All right? It'd be more like, I don't know how to say it, because, like most Russia and the United States, we're like even footing, right? Israel and Assyria was this massive monstrosity of an empire. Israel was this little state fighting for survival at this point. These are not the glory days of Israel. And those are the people that that God calls Jonah to go and reach. The Assyrians were known. What were they known for? The people of Nineveh were known as being an exceptionally, so they weren't just like humongous. They were known as being an exceptionally cruel and violent people. Some people have actually described the ancient Assyrian Empire as being like a modern day ISIS. An ancient picture of the modern day ISIS. They were a terrorist state. When the Assyrians, when they conquered people, they would come to your town. And by the way, they were the kind of people that just showed up. They were very much interested in taking more and more and more land. So they showed up to your town. If you resisted, if you decided that you wanted to be your own people, they would wipe you out. They would take over. They would kill you. All right? If you didn't resist, and even if you did resist and you managed to survive, those people who were left, they would come in, they would take all of your people, and they would enslave you. And they would drag you off back to Assyria to put you in different places. The people that were left, and if you were a peasant, like they only left behind the people that basically were the farmers, the poor people, the people that did nothing else, all right? If you were left behind to kind of work the land, they would put a governor over top of you. They'd put one of their own people over top of you, and that person would squeeze you. He'd take all your money, he'd take your food. You would just be the workers of the Assyrian Empire and the Assyrian army. Now, those are the people that God tells Jonah to go and redeem. The scary thing about this for Jonah, and this is really the direct, you can get the whole picture of why maybe Jonah doesn't want to go. 50 years, give or take, I don't have the exact number of years, but about 50 years after Jonah gets this command from God, the Assyrians, the people of the Ninevites, they're going to wipe out the northern kingdom. You know what I just said? That's what they're going to do to Jonah's people. They're going to totally wipe out the northern kingdom of Israel for good. That's it. When you think of Israel today, the people that survived, that was the southern tribe, Judah. They came back from exile. The 10 tribes, they're lost. They're gone. The Syrians wiped them out. Goodbye. That's it. Jonah's people got wiped out by the Assyrians down the road. And I don't know if Jonah knew that. He probably didn't, but maybe he did. I mean, he's a prophet. Sometimes God reveals how things are going to work out with prophets, and maybe Jonah knew. Maybe he knew that's what was going to happen to his people. Even if he didn't know, he had to have at least have like an idea, because this was, everybody in Israel was thinking that at any moment the Assyrians could come back. Syria was kind of on a little bit of a downtrend. They had pulled their military back from there. So at any moment, there had to have been this deep fear that at any moment the Assyrians are going to come back and we're going to be toast. They're going to get us. And those are the people that God calls Jonah to go and preach a message of redemption. Jonah, go to those Ninevites, save them, because otherwise they're going to get destroyed. Jonah doesn't want to go. Sometimes, whenever people talk about Jonah, you may have heard this, you may not have, but sometimes people are like, who's your Nineveh? Like, who are the people that God's calling you to reach? Who are the people that you need to get out to reach? Who are your enemies? Who is your Nineveh that God's calling you to? And I think that's a good thing to say, by the way. There's nothing wrong with that. And if you hear somebody say that, that's a good thing to say. It's a good question to have. But the truth of the matter is, when we think about like our enemies, nobody in this room has an enemy that even compares to Jonah and the Ninevites, to the people of God, the Israelites, and what the Ninevites were to them. And so nothing that we've got going on even compares to that. And those are the people that God calls Jonah to reach. There's a lesson in here. There's a lesson, and it's something we talked about last week. There's a reality that that no people, no nation is beyond the redemptive reach of God. We said that. I had mentioned Saul last week, Saul, and then now we know him as the Apostle Paul, the man who was changed, whose life was changed. There is nobody that's done something so evil. There's no people group or nation There's no person who's gone too far, who's committed too many sins, who's done too many evil things that they can't be redeemed by God. There's no one. Not the Ninevites, not anybody here, not anybody we know. That's beyond the redemptive reach of God. Unfortunately for Jonah, he cannot accept this. He can't accept the fact that there's no one beyond the redemptive reach of God. And so instead of heading to Nineveh and obeying God, it says that Jonah fled the presence of God. And so just get that in mind, right? Jonah fled from the presence of God. And in the process of doing that, he took some really drastic steps. He didn't just not do what God said. He took drastic steps to avoid God and to flee from his presence. If you want to just throw the map up. Instead of going to Nineveh, Jonah heads to this place called Tarshish, which isn't in the same neighborhood as Nineveh. It's not in the same region as Nineveh. It's not like it's on the way. He didn't stay in Israel. He went to Tarshish. And just to give you an idea, like when Jonah was probably growing up, Tarshish was like that place. Because keep in mind, this is before like modern day stuff. Tarshish was in that place like when someone was like, how far can you get? They would say something like Tarshish. Like that's the end of the earth. Like if like on the school maps, you'd have like, I don't know, Italy, maybe you'd get to Spain, and then like on the edge of the map, there would be Tarshish right there, boom, out of sight. That's where he went. That's where he went. Tarshish is way out of there. It's completely in the opposite direction. One day, I had a PE class, and I teach PE during the school year. And during the class, we were watching a movie. We had some popcorn. It was great. One of the kids, I asked the one kid, right? I tell this kid, hey, could you take the trash out to the dumpster? By the way, the trash was the class's trash. We had this popcorn. So I tell the kid, hey, could you take trash to the dumpster? And the kid goes away, comes back 5 minutes later. It's all good. Thanks, man. That's great. About a week later rolls by. I go into the youth room, and I notice that underneath the stairs is a bag of trash. And I open it up, and lo and behold, what's in the bag of trash? Popcorn. So I go, and I find this young man, and I said to him, hey, what happened here? I said, hey, go over there. Go to the dumpster and take the trash. And you said yes. I asked you, could you do it? You said yes. Why didn't you go there? What'd you do? Well, he says to me, I went downstairs. I threw the trash underneath the stairs. I walked outside, went behind the youth room. I waited 5 minutes, and I came back up. And so sometimes, right, and this happens with kids. Unfortunately, sometimes this happens with adults. Sometimes this may even happen with coworkers, right? We ask somebody, hey, could you go there? And then they go here. They go the complete opposite direction. You ask them to do this one thing, and they do the exact opposite of that one thing. God asked Jonah, he says, hey man, head out west. He tells Jonah to head out east. Jonah heads out west 2,500 miles to Tarshish. That's his direction that he's going. We also know, here's the interesting thing about this, right? So Jonah's heading to Tarshish. In the process of doing that, Jonah has to abandon everything. This isn't, like Jonah's not going to get to Tarshish and then take like the 9 a.m. flight back. He's not coming back. There is no coming back. Who knows how he found somebody to even take him to Tarshish? There wasn't a cruise boat heading out there. All right? He's heading to Tarshish. That's it. He's left everything behind. His family, his friends, his people. He's leaving them all so that he can escape the presence of God. I think, and this is just my thought, I think that's why he heads to Joppa. Joppa isn't a part of Israel. Why does he go to Joppa? Why doesn't he just take the closest port and head on out, all right? He goes to Joppa. I think he goes to Joppa, and this is why I think he wants his legacy. I think he wants people to remember him as that guy from 2 Kings. He'd rather just disappear, Next day, prophet disappears. All we remember about him, He was that guy that told us we were going to kick the Assyrians' butts. And now he's gone. Poof. Jonah probably, my guess is, he did not want to be known as the guy who saved the Ninevites. He didn't want to be known as that guy. He'd rather totally disappear off the face of the earth than be known as that guy. I mean, you can kind of imagine, right? Picture like in our own country, maybe during World War II, if you were the person, like God called you, hey, go to Europe and go to Berlin, and I need you to preach repentance and redemption to the Nazis, to Nazi Germany. I need you to go and speak to them. If you don't do it, I'm going to wipe out Hitler and the Nazis. So I need you to go over there and save them. I wouldn't want to do that. I mean, who would, you know what I mean? That would be really scary. I don't want to be known as the guy who saved Hitler. Jonah doesn't want to be known as the guy who saves the Ninevites. He heads down to Joppa, and boom. And he abandons everything. Everything. Everything he's ever known. And it says that Jonah paid a price. And it's really important that we understand this, because ultimately when it comes to sin, there's always a price that has to be paid. For Jonah, it was financial. I don't know how much it costs to get a one-way boat to Tarshish, but my guess is that Jonah probably emptied the piggy bank, his checking account. He probably took out his retirement, everything that he had, and he cashed in to get that ticket out of here. Had to be real expensive. I don't know what the cost was. For some people, it's financial. Jonah gave up his money, he gave up his friends, he gave up his family. He paid the cost, and he headed out of town. There's always a cost to sin. When I was a kid growing up, the church that I attended when I was in high school, it was a really good church. So I just want to point that out here. Really good church that I grew up in. But like most churches, there were some bad people in the church. There's some bad people. And one of the families that was at the church before I got there, it wasn't when I was there, before I got there, there were two families. They were pretty large families. They both had kids about the same age. Both families were in church, some kind of church leadership, I think like choir director or something, deacon positions. Both were really active in the church. Both families were friends with each other. And there was an affair. The husband in the one family and the wife in the other family had an affair. And at some point along their affair, they decided that it would be better to leave their prospective families, get divorced, and then remarry. And so I don't know how much they thought through it, but the ultimate cost of their sin, the cost that they paid, they decided to sin, and the price that they paid was their family. That was their family. And the only reason I know that is because when I was in high school at that church, I knew the kids. They were the same age as me. And you want to talk about totally destroying families. The one family, the guy that had the affair, his kids did not speak to him. They would not speak to him at all. One moment, he was a loving father who lived with them and they would do family stuff, and then the next, they wouldn't even talk to him. They were so disgusted. There's always a price to our sin. There's always going to be a price to be paid. And Jonah, he sinned, he gathered up his stuff, he paid the price, and he got out of town. When we get through we end up finding out, right? We get through, it's only 4 verses. What we end up finding out in these first 4 verses of Jonah is that Jonah ultimately has 2 theological problems. Now, when I say that, I don't mean that like the book of Jonah has a theological problem. I'm saying that Jonah the man, Jonah the prophet, has 2 theological problems. And maybe you've heard before, this is important, by the way. Some people might say like theology, which by the way, theology just means the study of God. Some people say like theology, that's really weighty stuff. That's not really important. I just want to have a relationship with God. Theology doesn't matter. No. Don't listen to anybody that says stuff like that. All right? They're lying. Theology is very important because what you know about God, how you understand God, changes how you have a relationship with God. The reason that Jonah has an issue with God, the reason the whole book of Jonah is just a mess, is because Jonah has two theological problems. You know, the first problem that Jonah has, it's a theological problem, by the way, it's sin. And all that sin is, when we get down to it, you know, for all the definitions you give for sin, all that sin really is that ultimately Jonah thinks he knows best. That's it. Jonah thinks that he knows better than God. God says, hey, you need to go to Nineveh and preach to these people. This is what you need to do. And Jonah says, nah, I'm heading to Tarshish. I'm out of here, God. I got a better idea. Jonah thinks he knows best. He thinks that he knows better than God, and that is a theological problem. Ultimately, that is sin, and that's one of the main issues with Jonah. He simply thinks he knows better. When you're 20 years old, you think you knew better than when you were 10 years old, right? And then when you're 30, that's when you knew that you knew better than when you were 20. And when you're 40, then you knew better than 30. And then when you're 50, you knew better than 40. And when you get to 60, that's when you knew better than when you were 50. And when you get to 70, you get 10% off at like Wendy's or something. I'm actually not sure. I don't know. People have told me. All to say, we always think that we know best. We always do. We always think we know better than someone. We think we have the best idea. We think we know better. We think we've got things figured out. And the more our life goes along, we typically gain thinking that we know better. But you know the truth is, this is a real truth. We don't know. We don't know best. No one does. God knows best. God knows best. We don't know anything. God knows best. Jonah's problem is he thinks that he knows, and he doesn't. God does. Second theological problem that Jonah has is that he thinks he can escape the presence of God. And that's a theological problem. Because one thing that we know about God is that his presence is everywhere. It's everywhere. And Jonah thinks he's going to escape. Proverbs 15:3, it says, the eyes of the Lord are in every place, watching the evil and the good. There's a theological word for this. It's on the screen. You probably haven't heard of it. Maybe you had. It's omnipresence. All right, it's omnipresence. You're going to want to remember that. Down the road in a couple weeks, you're going to need to know that. Okay, omnipresence, real simple. It just means, just like I said, God is everywhere. Now, and I want to differentiate. Right? When I say that God is everywhere, I don't mean that God is like this pew and the carpet and everything. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that simply God's presence, his presence is everywhere. It's here. It's down the road. It's everywhere. It's even in places that are evil. We think like, oh, God's not present in strip clubs. He's not present where there's terrorists and torture going on. No, he's there. He's present. He knows exactly what's happening. God's present everywhere. And Jonah should know this because he's a prophet. And this is something, I don't know what they taught at prophet school, but this was kind of like something you figure that would be like elementary school lessons, you know, hey, just so you know, God's everywhere. And, you know, I think Jonah kind of does know it because when he's with these sailors on this boat, they come down and they're like, hey, Jonah, who are you? What's going on with you, man? What's up with this storm? Jonah says, hey, guys, I'm a Hebrew, and I worship the God who created the earth and the seas. And this moron is trying to escape the presence of God on the seas that God created. You know, it's kind of like sometimes if you're hiking, if you go hiking with me, you know, you're walking with somebody and, you know, maybe they say, Sapolo says to me, he says, hey, man, what if a bear comes? Well, I'll tell you what, Sapolo, if a bear comes, I can't run faster than the bear. I'm going to run faster than you. Because I don't know if you know anything about bears, but a black bear can run 35 miles per hour, and I can't run 35 miles per hour, but I can run faster than a Sapolo, okay? And I don't know, like you can try and climb away from the bear, but I don't know if you know this, but bears can climb. They're better climbers than me and you. They're going to get you, All right, and maybe you're thinking like, well, there's a pond. I'm going to jump into the pond. I'm going to swim away and escape the bear. Nope. Bears are excellent swimmers. That thing's going to chase you down. Maybe your last option is you turn around, you fight the bear. You turn around, you fight the bear. No. That bear is going to kill you. One swipe of his paw, just totally destroy you. All that to say, right, we know some things we can't escape from. You can't run from a bear. Jonah should know that he can't run from God. God's not a bear, he's God. He's the God who created the bears. And Jonah is trying to run from him. He's trying to escape him. And he should know that it's not possible. It's not even like remotely close. You can't escape from the presence of God. And it's a theological problem ultimately. Jonah misunderstands God. He thinks he knows better, and he thinks he can get away from him, and he can't. And it's interesting, by the way, these two theological problems, sin and thinking you're going to get away with your sin, they go hand in hand, right? We do this. We even rationalize it. We might know what's right, but we still rationalize ourselves around it, right? We start thinking, okay, as long as I get away with it, right? So I think, God, I know you say I shouldn't be looking at this stuff, but I know best. So I'm going to watch it. And then we start to think, well, nobody's going to know. No one's going to find out. It's almost like we start thinking like if nobody caught us, nobody knows. God doesn't know. It'll be all cool, and everything will just work out. And so we think we get away with it. We think we know best, and we think we can escape, and we all just it works together. It all wraps up these theological issues, and it totally destroys us. Jonah's called to go. This is interesting, right? Jonah's called to go to the great city of Nineveh. And ultimately, he doesn't go because he thinks he knows better than God and he thinks he can escape God. The very next verse, verse 4, it says that God sent a storm. You want to go, and it says a great storm. You're not going to go to the great city of Nineveh? I'm going to send a great storm. Jonah tries to escape, and right away, next verse, boom, God is coming. You cannot escape the presence of God. I kind of want to wrap this up and bring it to a close. Some of us right now, and I just want to be real, some of us right now are probably on the run. We're probably on the run. We're already, not literally on the run, but we're already doing stuff, and we're looking at stuff, and we're having conversations that we know we're not supposed to have. And we've already made some decisions that we think we know better than God. Some of us are on the run right now. And we think we've escaped the presence of God, and we haven't. And then there's some of us who, and maybe we've been working this in our mind for a while, we're thinking about running. We're thinking about running, and we've been counting the cost. And we start to think, is my reputation worth it? Is my family worth it? Is all this money I've saved, is it worth it? And maybe I think I know best, and you know what? I'm about to do this. Some of us are already running. Some of us are thinking about running. Some of us are about to take off and abandon the presence of God. We're going to run from God. And you know what? The only reason I say that I know that some of us are doing it is because just like Jonah, everybody in here is a person. We're just people. And we do dumb things sometimes. And we fall sometimes. And like Jonah, some of us start running from the presence of God. And we just miss out on so much. Friends, I want you to understand, no one is escaping God. No one gets away with their sin. No one gets away with the things they've done wrong. Nobody gets away. Ultimately, you want to figure out how this really all works out with sin? Sin ultimately is dealt with in two ways. Either your sin is paid for on the cross through Jesus Christ in a sacrifice, That's where it is. It's either there or it's eternity separated from God. And the reality is we don't even get away with sin during our lives. We think that we can hide stuff. We think we can keep it away. We think it won't impact us. No, nothing that's hidden stays hidden. You can't sweep under the rug decisions that are going to destroy your life. They're going to mess you up. You can't escape God. And so as I'm finishing this up and I think about Jonah and why he fled and all the things that were going through his mind, I just want to point out, all right, I want to give you a spoiler alert. When we think about some of the stuff we do, spoiler alert, end of the book, Jonah says something about God. He tells us why he ran. He says, the reason I ran, he said, I knew you were going to do this, God. You're a God of mercy and a God of love. That's why he ran. He ran because he knew that God was going to do something. He was going to be merciful to the Ninevites. And so he took off. But when I read that and I think about that, that's when I start to think, why in the world would you ever run from the presence of that God? The God of mercy and the God of love. The God who sent his son, Jesus Christ, to die on a cross for us. Why would anybody in their right mind ever run from him? And I just think if we can't escape God, for all the issues and the stuff that we have going on, if we can't escape God, then why don't we embrace him? Why don't we stay in his presence? Why don't we follow his plans? Why don't we dwell there? And wherever we're at, whether we're running away from God or we're just in a spot of no growth, why is it that we're not running at God? Why is that not our direction? Why is not that the place that we're going? Why don't we embrace God? There's no good reason to run. Our God is a God of mercy and of love. He's the kind of God that sends his son to die on a cross so that we can know him. And so as we bring this to a close and we kind of end this up, we don't need to wait till we get any further in Jonah. We don't have to wait till the end of Jonah to experience the redemption of God. We don't have to wait any further. We don't have to get any further. I gave you the spoiler alert because it's so good that I don't want you to have to wait until like week 7, okay? We can experience the redemption of God today. We can dwell in his presence. We can stay and we can follow him today. And so as we close, that is what I want us to do. I want us to come to the Lord. I want us to embrace him.